The night of October 24th, 1944. Taiwan Strait, between Formosa and the Chinese mainland. Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane stands in the conning tower of USS Tang, staring at his radar screen. The green phosphorescent display shows a cluster of contacts 20 miles north, moving south at 12 knots. 20 miles. The convoy commander aboard the lead Japanese transport has no idea he's already being watched. He's sailing in what he believes is sanctuary, protected by darkness and distance. His lookouts scan the horizon for periscope wakes. His escorts run their diesel engines at cruise power. Everything appears normal. They have no radar capable of detecting a surfaced submarine, and Tang's SJ radar set has been tracking them since they cleared the Fukien coast. 20 miles is an impossible distance in the Pacific War of 1942. But this is October 1944, and the rules have changed. The Japanese never figured it out. They built escort ships and hunted American submarines using tactics and technology designed for a different war. Meanwhile, American submarines had been sailing into the heart of Japanese-controlled waters for 2 years, detecting convoys from distances the Japanese thought physically impossible, setting up attacks with mechanical precision and vanishing before the escorts could respond. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The technological gap wasn't subtle, it was devastating, and it decided the outcome of the Pacific submarine campaign. Commander O'Kane plots the convoy's course on his navigation chart. He has time. 20 miles gives him perhaps 90 minutes to position Tang for the perfect attack. He can choose his angle of approach. He can calculate which ships are the most valuable targets. He can set up multiple firing solutions before the convoy's lookouts spot even a shadow on the water. This is what American submarine commanders call a setup shot. Everything in your favor. The enemy obligingly sailing toward you, in formation, while you prepare to tear that formation apart. The SJ radar system doesn't just detect targets. It provides range, bearing, and enough detail to estimate ship type. O'Kane's radar operator can distinguish between a destroyer and a transport. He can count individual ships in formation. He can track multiple contacts simultaneously and feed that information directly to the torpedo data computer. The Japanese convoy commander has none of this. His lookouts use optical rangefinders that max out around 8 miles in daylight and become nearly useless after sunset. His escorts use sound detection equipment that might, under perfect conditions, detect a submerged submarine at 3 miles. His newest escort ships carry primitive radar sets, but they're configured for aircraft detection and are almost useless for surface search. And even those few escorts with surface search radar have maximum detection ranges of perhaps 10 miles, half what Tang can achieve. The mathematical reality is brutal. By the time Japanese escorts can detect Tang, she's already fired her torpedoes and is accelerating away at 20 knots. The escorts charge toward the attack point, but they're charging at where Tang was, not where she is. O'Kane will watch them on his radar screen, their blips moving in confused circles while Tang opens the range to safe distance. Then he'll loop around, get ahead of the convoy again, and set up for another attack. The Japanese call it phantom attacks. Torpedoes appear from nowhere, the submarine vanishes. No matter how many escorts they assign to convoys, no matter how many depth charges they drop, the submarines keep coming. What the Japanese never understood is that radar detection range isn't just a tactical advantage. It's a fundamental shift in submarine warfare doctrine. Before radar, submarine attacks were desperate affairs. You had to get close, very close, close enough to see the target with your own eyes or through a periscope. Close, enough that escorts could hunt you with hydrophones. Close enough that if anything went wrong, you were probably going to die. The American submarine campaign in 1942 reflected this reality. Aggressive captains died. Cautious captains survived but accomplished little. The kill rates were mediocre at best. Then, in mid-1942, the SJ radar began appearing on American submarines. And everything changed. The SJ was a 10-centimeter wavelength surface search radar, a variant of the SG system used on surface warships. It operated at about 3,000 MHz with sufficient power to detect a large ship at 30 miles under good conditions. More importantly, it could track that ship continuously, providing updated range and bearing every few seconds. The system used a rotating parabolic antenna mounted on a retractable mast. When surfaced, submarines could sweep the horizon in a complete 360-degree arc every few seconds. The display in the conning tower showed contacts as bright spots on a circular screen called a PPI, Plan Position Indicator. Range rings marked distance from the submarine. The operator could instantly assess how many ships were present, their formation, their course, and speed. By early 1943, every American submarine in the Pacific had SJ radar. The Japanese knew American submarines carried some kind of detection equipment. Their intelligence officers had recovered enough wreckage to confirm that much. But they fundamentally misunderstood what radar meant for submarine tactics. Japanese naval doctrine assumed submarines would attack submerged, using periscopes for targeting. Their anti-submarine warfare training emphasized detecting periscopes, tracking submerged contacts with sonar, and depth-charging suspected positions. All of this was designed to counter the submarine tactics of 1941. It was obsolete by 1943. Because American submarines weren't attacking and submerged anymore. They were attacking on the surface, at night, using radar. The transformation was doctrinal as much as technological. In 1942, submarine commanders operated cautiously. Convoys were dangerous targets. Multiple escorts, coordinated screening, the risk of being trapped on the surface. Better to hunt individual merchants sailing without protection, but radar changed the mathematics. A submarine with radar could track an entire convoy from safe distance, plot its course with precision, and maneuver to optimal attack position without ever being seen. The escort screen became irrelevant if you could see the entire formation while remaining invisible yourself. Lieutenant Commander Dudley Mush Morton pioneered the tactics on USS WWII. Morton was O'Kane's commanding officer in 1942 and early 1943. Together, they developed what became known as down-the-throat attacks. Surface at night. Use radar to find the convoy. Get ahead of its projected course. Wait until it comes to you. Fire a spread of torpedoes at close range. Crash dive only if escorts get too close. Otherwise, stay surfaced and use your superior speed to escape. It was aggressive, it was dangerous, and it was devastatingly effective. Morton sank 19 Japanese ships before WWII was lost in October 1943. O'Kane took command of Tang and refined Morton's tactics into a science. The key was information dominance. O'Kane always knew where the enemy was. The Japanese never knew where he was. That asymmetry made everything else possible. Tang's patrol reports document attack after attack, where the submarine detected convoys from 15 to 25 miles away, tracked them for hours, positioned for optimal firing solutions, executed attacks, and escaped without the escorts ever establishing effective counterattacks. The reports read like turkey shoots. February 19, 44. Detected convoy at 18 miles. Sank 3 ships. June 24, 1944. Detected convoy at 22 miles. Sank 4 ships in a single attack. October 23, 1944. Detected convoy at 16 miles. Sank 5 ships in 10 minutes. The Japanese convoy system couldn't adapt fast enough. By late 1943, the Imperial Japanese Navy had organized the Grand Escort Fleet, a dedicated force for protecting merchant shipping. They assembled large convoys with multiple escorts. They established regular routes with coordinated air cover. They trained crews in anti-submarine tactics. All of it conventional doctrine, all of it based on World War I experience and early World War II Atlantic battles. And none of it worked against submarines that could see you before you could see them. Japanese destroyer escorts were formidable warships in their intended role. fast, maneuverable, armed with depth charges and torpedoes, crewed by experienced sailors. But they were designed to hunt submarines that were already detected. The doctrine assumed you'd spot the periscope, or pick up the sound of the submarine with hydrophones, then converge on that position with multiple ships. The escorts practiced coordinated search patterns, depth charge runs, long pursuits of suspected contacts. But all of that required knowing where the submarine was. Against O'Kane and other American commanders using radar-directed surface attacks, the escorts were essentially blind. Statistics tell the story. In 1942, American submarines sank 560,000 tons of Japanese shipping, an average of 47,000 tons per month. Respectable but not war-winning. In 1943, that number jumped to 1.3 million tons, an average of 108,000 tons per month. In 1944, American submarines sank 2.4 million tons, 200,000 tons per month. The tonnage sunk increased five-fold between 1942 and 1944. The number of American submarines operating in the Pacific only doubled in that same period. The difference wasn't more submarines. It was better submarines using better tactics enabled by better technology. The SJ radar was only part of the equation, but it was the critical part. It transformed submarine warfare from an opportunistic hunt to a systematic campaign. American submarine commanders stopped patrolling randomly and hoping to encounter targets. Instead, they positioned themselves along known Japanese shipping routes, waited for radar to detect approaching convoys, and then executed calculated attacks. The submarines became invisible predators in a hunting ground the Japanese couldn't avoid using. Every ton of fuel, every ton of food, every ton of ammunition that Japan needed to sustain its empire had to cross seas patrolled by American submarines. And those submarines could see Japanese ships from distances the Japanese couldn't match. Japanese anti-submarine forces were not incompetent. Their sonar was good, sometimes excellent. Their depth charges were effective, with explosive charges of 600 to 1,000 pounds that could crack a submarine hull at 300 feet depth. Their destroyer captains were aggressive and well-trained, but they were fighting with one hand tied behind their backs. Sonar only works if the submarine is submerged and within range. Depth charges only work if you know where to drop them. Aggressive destroyer captains only matter if they can find the submarine. Radar gave American submarines the ability to avoid all of those threats by simply staying surfaced and maintaining distance. The only effective Japanese countermeasure was aircraft. Planes forced submarines to dive, limiting mobility and preventing surface attacks. But the Imperial Japanese Navy never had enough patrol aircraft to cover the vast distances of the Pacific. And by 1944, American submarines carried air search radar that could detect approaching aircraft at 20 miles, giving them time to dive before being spotted. The submarines became nearly impossible to trap. Surface at night when Japanese aircraft couldn't operate, use radar to attack convoys, dive at dawn before aircraft patrols began, stay submerged during the day, surface again at dusk, and repeat. O'Kane's attack on the night of October 24, 1944, demonstrates the doctrine perfectly. Tang detected the convoy at approximately 8 p.m. at a range of 20 miles. The convoy was heading south at 12 knots, hugging the Chinese coast. O'Kane had time to analyze the situation. The convoy was large, at least 14 ships with numerous escorts. Some of the transports appeared to be carrying aircraft, visible as crated planes stacked on the decks. This was a high-value target, probably reinforcements for the Philippines campaign. Tang closed to 15 miles and paralleled the convoy's course, staying to seaward of the formation. O'Kane wanted to get ahead of the convoy, then turn in for a bow attack. Tang was making 20 knots surfaced, 8 knots faster than the convoy. Within an hour, she'd be in position. The radar operator provided constant updates: range, bearing, course, speed. The information flowed to the plotting team in the conning tower, who calculated firing solutions on multiple targets. Everything was precise, mathematical, inevitable. The Japanese convoy continued south, unaware that a submarine was matching their every move from 9 miles away. Then things got complicated. One of the escort ships began signaling with a large searchlight. The light swept across the water, illuminating the convoy. Perhaps they detected something. Perhaps they were just being cautious. O'Kane didn't care. The searchlight actually helped him. It backlit the convoy, making the silhouettes clearer through his periscope. He picked his targets: a large 3-deck transport, priority 1, a medium transport, priority 2, a large tanker, priority 3, range varying from 900 to 1400 yards. Tang continued to close, radar tracking every ship, torpedo solutions ready. At midnight, O'Kane gave the order: fire. 2 torpedoes at the first transport, 2 at the second transport, 2 at the tanker. The torpedoes left the tubes with compressed air hisses, their wakes churning white in the dark water. Tang paralleled the convoy, turning to bring the stern tubes to bear. More targets. Another transport. Another tanker. Fire. The first explosions lit the night. The 3-deck transport staggered, flames erupting from its side. The medium transport exploded with such violence that debris flew hundreds of feet into the air. The tanker's cargo ignited, turning it into a floating inferno. The escorts scattered in confusion. Some charged toward Tang's last firing position. Others circled the burning ships, looking for survivors. At least, one escort began firing randomly into the darkness, possibly at another escort mistaken for the submarine. Tang's radar showed the chaos clearly. Individual ships breaking formation, escorts zigzagging, the convoy disintegrating. O'Kane pushed Tang to full speed and cleared the area. By the time the Japanese regrouped, Tang was 6,000 yards away and still accelerating. One of the escorts managed to drop depth charges, but they exploded nowhere near the submarine. Tang had escaped before effective counterattacks could develop. And O'Kane wasn't done. He looped around to the north, getting ahead of the convoy again. The surviving ships had reformed, still heading south, but now in disarray. Their formation was loose, their course erratic, perfect targets for a second attack. Tang closed from ahead, using the dark coastline as backdrop. More radar contacts, more firing solutions, more torpedoes. By the time dawn broke on October 25th, O'Kane had sunk at least 7 ships and damaged several others. Tang had expended all 24 torpedoes. The Japanese convoy that had sailed from Fukien with 14 ships would limp into harbour with less than half that number. This was the reality of Pacific submarine warfare in 1944. Systematic destruction of Japanese merchant shipping by submarines that could see without being seen. The Japanese tried everything to counter it. Larger convoys with more escorts, night-flying aircraft, better sonar and hydrophones, radar detectors that could sense American submarine radar emissions. None of it worked well enough to matter. The fundamental problem remained unsolved. American submarines could detect Japanese ships from 20 miles away. Japanese escorts could detect American submarines from 3 miles away at best. That 17-mile gap was unsurvivable. The technological disparity had strategic consequences. Japan's economy depended on shipping: oil from the Dutch East Indies, rice from Southeast Asia, iron ore from China. Everything moved by sea. American submarines turned those sea lanes into killing zones. By 1945, Japanese merchant marine losses exceeded 80%. Ships couldn't move without being sunk. Troops couldn't be reinforced. Supplies couldn't reach frontline units. Japanese industry began to shut down from lack of raw materials. The home islands faced starvation as food imports dried up. Admiral Karl Donitz's U-boats in the Atlantic had aimed for the same goal: strangling Britain by sinking merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. The British defeated that campaign through convoy systems, escort carriers, long-range patrol aircraft, and, crucially, radar and sonar systems that gave escorts the advantage. The Japanese faced the mirror image of that battle in the Pacific, but unlike the British, they never developed effective countermeasures. The reason was simple. They never understood that radar had changed everything. Japanese naval. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Doctrine in 1941 presumed submarines would fight submerged, that they were slow and vulnerable on the surface, that proper escort tactics could protect convoys if executed correctly. All of these assumptions were reasonable given pre-war experience. They were also completely wrong by 1943. American submarines fought surfaced whenever possible. They were faster than most merchant ships when surfaced, and escort tactics based on close-range sonar detection were useless against submarines that attacked from beyond visual range. The Japanese did eventually deploy radar on escort ships, but too little too late. In September 1944, some escorts began receiving surface search radar. The Type 22 system could detect ships at about 20 miles under good conditions. But by then, the submarine campaign had already crippled Japanese shipping. Fewer than 1 in 3 escorts had radar by war's end, and the operators were poorly trained. They didn't trust the equipment. They didn't know how to interpret the displays. They continued to rely on visual lookouts and sonar, the tools they understood. American submarine commanders noted in patrol reports that even when Japanese escorts appeared to have detected them on radar, the escorts' responses were slow and ineffective. The tactical doctrine for using radar didn't exist. The contrast with American radar development is stark. The United States had begun serious radar research in the late 1930s. By Pearl Harbor, functional surface search radar existed on major warships. The technology transferred to submarines by late 1941. The first SJ prototype deployed in December 1941. Within a year, the system was standardized. Within 2 years, every submarine in the Pacific had it. And more importantly, doctrine evolved alongside technology. Submarine commanders experimented with radar-directed attacks, shared lessons through patrol reports, developed tactical manuals that every new captain studied. Japan began radar research in 1941, 4 years behind. The military leadership assigned it low priority. Resources went to combat ships and aircraft. Merchant shipping protection was an afterthought. When the submarine threat became undeniable in 1943, Japan tried to catch up. But radar development is complex. You need scientists who understand wave propagation. You need engineers who can build reliable high-frequency transmitters and sensitive receivers. You need manufacturing capability to produce systems in quantity. You need trained operators. You need tactical doctrine. Japan had none of this in place. They were starting from scratch, while the Americans were already on their 3rd or 4th generation of improvement. The institutional failures compounded the technological gap. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy developed radar independently and refused to share research. Army radar focused on air, defense. Navy radar focused on fleet operations. Nobody focused on merchant shipping protection until it was too late. When they finally tried to coordinate efforts, they discovered both services had duplicated research, wasted resources, and developed incompatible systems. Meanwhile, American research institutions like Bell Laboratories, MIT's Radiation Laboratory, and the Naval Research Laboratory pooled knowledge, shared breakthroughs, and pushed each other toward better solutions. Japanese radar production suffered from material shortages. Key components required copper, aluminum, and precision manufacturing. By 1943, Japan's industrial base was already strained. Priority went to building aircraft and warships, not electronic equipment for merchant escorts. The Type 22 radar used magnetron tubes that were difficult to manufacture reliably. Quality control was poor. Equipment failed frequently. Spare parts were scarce. American submarines patrol reports mention detecting Japanese escorts transmitting erratically, suggesting their radar sets were malfunctioning or improperly maintained. Training was another critical failure. Radar operation requires understanding principles that are counterintuitive to sailors trained in traditional seamanship. You're detecting objects you cannot see. You're interpreting electronic displays that show abstract representations of reality. You're making tactical decisions based on information that contradicts your visual observations. This requires extensive training and experience. American submarine radar operators underwent months of specialized instruction. They practiced interpreting displays until pattern recognition became instinctive. They learned to distinguish between real contacts and false echoes, between large ships and small ones, between formations and individual vessels. Japanese escort radar operators, when they had radar at all, received minimal training. A few days of instruction on how to Sapates, turn the equipment on and adjust basic settings. No time for developing the interpretive skills that make radar useful. Many operators didn't trust what the radar showed them. If the radar said a submarine was 8 miles away but lookouts saw nothing, they assumed the radar was malfunctioning. They'd shut it off or ignore the contact. American submarines exploited this reluctance. Captains learned they could operate at 10 to 15 miles from Japanese escorts with minimal risk of effective counterattacks, even if those escorts had radar. The doctrine gap was perhaps most critical. Having technology isn't enough. You need to know how to use it. They established standard procedures for detecting convoys, tracking them, estimating their composition, calculating intercept courses, positioning for attacks, and escaping after firing torpedoes. Every step was planned, practiced, and refined through combat experience. Radar contacts were classified by their characteristics. Strong return with steady bearing means large ship on steady course. Weak return with changing bearing means small ship or distant target. Multiple returns in line means convoy formation. The Americans also developed doctrine for radar communication. Submarines operating in wolf packs would share radar contact information via radio, coordinating attacks on the same convoy from different angles. One submarine would track the convoy from a distance, reporting position and course, while others maneuvered for attack positions. This multiplied effectiveness. Japanese escorts couldn't defend against coordinated attacks because they couldn't coordinate their own responses. Their communication systems were primitive, often limited to visual signals that didn't work at night. Japanese convoy commanders never developed equivalent doctrine because they never fully accepted that radar had changed the tactical environment. Battle. Reports from 1944 show commanders attributing submarine attacks to bad luck, insufficient escorts, or supernatural enemy capabilities. They rarely concluded that American submarines simply had better information. Even when radar was available, Japanese doctrine continued to emphasize visual searches and sonar detection. Escorts would run in circles, dropping depth charges on suspected positions, rather than using radar to track actual submarine locations. It was futile, expensive, and it didn't work. The human cost of this technological gap was staggering. Between 1942 and 1945, American submarines sank approximately 1,300 Japanese merchant ships, totaling 5.3 million tons. Roughly 200 warships were also destroyed. The crews of those ships, approximately 100,000 Japanese sailors and merchant mariners, were killed. Tens of thousands more soldiers drowned when troop transports were sunk en route to battle zones. The submarines that accomplished this destruction, operating with radar-directed tactics, lost 48 boats from all causes during the entire war. The exchange ratio was crushing. For every American submarine lost, the Japanese lost dozens of ships. The broader strategic impact extended beyond simple tonnage numbers. Japan's military relied on imported resources. Without oil from the Dutch East Indies, the combined fleet couldn't operate. Without iron from China, factories couldn't build weapons. Without food imports, civilians starved. The American submarine campaign severed those supply lines. By late 1944, Japanese merchant ship sailings had declined 80% from 1941 levels. Ships that did sail moved cautiously, hugging coastlines, travelling only in daylight, taking circuitous routes to avoid known submarine patrol areas. All of this reduced the efficiency of shipping even beyond the direct losses to submarine attacks. The Japanese Army in the Philippines, defending against MacArthur's invasion in late 1944, received virtually no supplies by sea. The reinforcements that did arrive came piecemeal, already weakened by the ordeal of sailing through submarine-infested waters. The Take-Ichi convoy in April 1944 attempted to transport 2 divisions to the Philippines. American submarines, guided by decrypted radio intercepts and using radar to track the convoy, sank 4 transports and killed 4,000 soldiers. The surviving units arrived so depleted they contributed little to the defense. Stories like this repeated across the Pacific theater. Convoys attacked, ships sunk, troops drowned or stranded, operations cancelled for lack of supplies. The contrast with the Battle of the Atlantic is instructive. German U-boats faced British and American escorts that had radar, sonar, direction-finding equipment, aircraft support, and doctrine for using all of it. The Allies still lost thousands of ships, but they developed countermeasures that eventually turned the tide. British scientists created cavity magnetrons that enabled centimetre wavelength radar with unprecedented accuracy. Escort carriers provided air cover in mid-ocean. Hunter-killer groups pursued U-boats relentlessly. Code-breaking revealed U-boat positions. The Allies threw enormous resources at the problem and solved it. Japan faced the same challenge but couldn't match the Allied response. Japanese scientists were talented but lacked resources and institutional support. Japanese industry couldn't mass-produce electronic equipment while also building ships and aircraft. Japanese tactical doctrine couldn't adapt quickly enough. And critically, Japan never had enough escorts. British escort production eventually exceeded German U-boat production. Japan never came close to building enough escorts to protect its shipping. By 1944, the Grand Escort Fleet had perhaps 150 dedicated escort vessels to protect convoys across the entire Pacific and Southeast Asian theatre. The task was impossible, even with perfect technology and doctrine. American submarine commanders understood they were winning and adjusted tactics to maximize impact. They targeted tankers preferentially because fuel was Japan's most critical import. They targeted troop transports because killing soldiers at sea prevented them from reaching battlefields. They targeted large cargo ships because they carried the most tonnage per sinking. The patrol reports show this prioritization explicitly. Captains would track a convoy for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to attack the most valuable targets. With radar providing complete situational awareness, they could afford to be selective. USS Tang's 5th Patrol exemplifies this selective aggression. O'Kane detected multiple convoys during the patrol, but only attacked those carrying high-value cargo. When radar showed a convoy of small coastal vessels, he let it pass. When radar showed a convoy with large transports and tankers, he attacked mercilessly. Over the course of 2 major engagements, Tang sank 13 ships, totaling approximately 63,000 tons. The Japanese naval records of the convoy attacked on October 24th show they lost at least 7 ships confirmed sunk, with several more damaged. O'Kane had destroyed nearly half a convoy in a single night. The surviving ships scattered and were attacked by other American submarines over the following days. Tang's destruction on October 25th, killed by its own malfunctioning torpedo, doesn't diminish the success of the patrol. O'Kane and his crew had demonstrated that radar-directed surface attacks could annihilate convoys despite heavy escort protection. The tactics they perfected were already standard doctrine across the submarine force. Tang was exceptional in execution, but not unique in approach. Dozens of American submarines were, operating the same way, using the same radar systems, achieving similar results. The cumulative impact was systemic collapse of Japanese maritime logistics. The historical irony is that Japan understood the importance of naval power better than most nations. The Imperial Japanese Navy was a formidable force. Its officers studied Mahan's theories of sea power. They trained relentlessly. They developed sophisticated tactics for surface combat and carrier aviation. They built some of the finest warships in the world. But they fundamentally misunderstood modern submarine warfare and the technologies that enabled it. They prepared for the war they expected: battleship engagements, carrier duels, destroyer battles. They didn't prepare for the war they got: a grinding attrition campaign against their merchant marine by submarines they couldn't see and couldn't stop. American submariners in the Pacific became known as the Silent Service, partly for security reasons, partly because submarine operations remained classified long after the war. But the silence also reflected the nature of the work. There were no grand fleet battles in submarine warfare, no dramatic surface engagements, just patient tracking, careful calculations, torpedo attacks in the dark, and submerged escapes. The radar screens in submarine conning towers displayed the reality of this war. Green phosphorescent blips representing enemy ships, range and bearing numbers updating continuously, mathematical certainty replacing fog of war. The Japanese appeared on those screens as targets, nothing more. They sailed in formation, unaware they were being hunted, and American submarines destroyed them with industrial efficiency. The technological development story begins in 1939. American naval researchers at the Naval Research Laboratory had been experimenting with radar since the mid-1930s. Early systems were crude: large antennas, low power, poor resolution. But by 1939, they'd developed functional prototypes capable of detecting ships at reasonable ranges. The challenge was miniaturization. Surface warships had space for large radar installations. Submarines did not. Everything had to fit through a 30-inch hatch. The antenna had to retract into the hull when diving. The electronics had to operate reliably in a cramped, humid environment where temperature swings exceeded 50 degrees. The SG surface search radar, developed for destroyers and cruisers, provided the foundation. It operated at 3,000 megahertz, which translated to a wavelength of 10 centimeters. The shorter wavelength allowed smaller antennas while maintaining directional accuracy. Engineers designed a parabolic dish antenna 3 feet in diameter that could be mounted on a mast. The mast retracted hydraulically into the submarine's fair water, protected when submerged. The transmitter and receiver units were compact enough to fit in small equipment spaces. Display unit occupied a section of the conning tower where the captain and exec could view it constantly during surface operations. The first prototype SJ deployment occurred aboard USS Gudgeon in December 1941, just after Pearl Harbor. The system worked but needed refinement. Range was adequate but not spectacular, perhaps 15 miles on large ships under good conditions. The display was difficult to read in poor weather. Rain created clutter that obscured actual contacts. The antenna had mechanical problems, requiring frequent maintenance, but the basic concept proved sound. Gudgeon's captain reported that radar detection exceeded optical detection by significant margins, especially at night. The submarine could track contacts continuously, rather than relying on intermittent periscope observations. Through early 1942, engineers refined the SJ design. They increased transmitter power from 15 kilowatts to 50 kilowatts, extending range to 25 miles. They improved the receiver sensitivity, allowing detection of smaller targets. They developed filtering circuits that reduced rain clutter. They reinforced the antenna mounting to handle rough seas. They trained operators specifically on interpreting radar displays, creating a new rating within the submarine force. By mid-1942, the SJ was standardized. Production ramped up. New submarines received the equipment as part of their initial fit-out. Older submarines got retrofitted during scheduled maintenance periods. The SJ-1 variant, introduced in 1943, incorporated further improvements. A new perforated parabolic antenna design increased detection range to 30 miles for large ships. The display unit got a brighter screen that remained readable even in bright sunlight. The transmitter reliability improved, reducing the frequency of breakdowns. Most importantly, doctrine caught up with technology. Submarine Force Headquarters issued tactical bulletins explaining how to use radar for convoy attacks. They collected patrol reports from successful attacks and distributed them as case studies. They organized training sessions where experienced captains taught new captains the tricks they'd learned. Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane had learned those tricks well. His partnership with Dudley Morton on Wahoo had forged the template. Morton was the aggressive captain, willing to take enormous risks for big kills. O'Kane was the meticulous executive officer, planning attacks with mathematical precision. Together, they'd proven that surface attacks using radar were not just viable, but superior to traditional submerged approaches. When O'Kane took command of Tang in October 1943, he was already one of the most experienced submarine officers in the Pacific. He knew exactly how to maximize radar's potential. Tang's first 4 patrols established O'Kane's reputation. Every patrol resulted in multiple confirmed kills. His tactics were aggressive but calculated. He'd track convoys for hours, sometimes days, waiting for perfect attack positions. He'd study the escort patterns, identifying gaps in the screening. He'd time his attacks for moments when escorts were farthest from the convoy center. He'd fire spreads of torpedoes designed to hit multiple ships nearly simultaneously, creating chaos that prevented organized counterattacks. And he'd escape using Tang's superior surface speed, often running directly away from the convoy at 20 knots while escorts circled the sinking ships, dropping depth charges randomly. The patrol reports document O'Kane's systematic approach. February 1944, first patrol. Detected convoy at 18 miles range off Truk. Tracked for 3 hours. Positioned ahead of convoy course. Fired 4 torpedoes from 1,500 yards. 3 hits. Gioten Maru sank in minutes. Cleared area before escorts responded. 2 days later, another convoy. Detected at 16 miles. Night surface attack. 4 torpedoes. Fukuyama Maru destroyed. Next morning, found damaged ship from previous convoy. Finished it with remaining torpedoes. Total for patrol. 3 ships confirmed sunk, 1 damaged. June 1944, third patrol, Yellow Sea and East China Sea. Detected convoy southwest of Kagoshima at 22 miles. Large formation, 6 ships, 16 escorts. O'Kane spent 4 hours maneuvering into position. Surface attack, multiple spreads. Initial reports claimed 2 ships sunk. Post-war Japanese records showed 4 ships actually sank: Tamahoko Maru, Tainan Maru, Nasusan Maru, Kenichi Maru, over 16,000 tons. The torpedoes had overlapped, hitting ships O'Kane hadn't even targeted. The convoy disintegrated, escorts scattered. Tang escaped without receiving a single depth charge. This was the pattern repeated across the submarine force. Not every captain was as aggressive as O'Kane. Not every submarine achieved Tang's kill rate, but the tactics were universal. Use radar to find convoys, track them from safe distance. Attack at night when Japanese visual detection was weakest. Exploit American advantages in surface speed and detection range. The cumulative effect was devastating. Japanese convoy losses accelerated month after month through 1944. By autumn, the Grand Escort Fleet was overwhelmed. They didn't have enough escorts. They didn't have enough aircraft. They didn't have the technology to detect submarines before the submarines detected them. Japanese merchant ship construction couldn't replace the losses. Japan's shipyards could build perhaps 300,000 tons of merchant shipping per year at maximum capacity. American submarines were sinking 600,000 tons per year by 1944. The math was inescapable. The merchant fleet was dying, and with it, Japan's ability to supply its military and feed its population. The home islands faced genuine starvation by late 1944. Rice imports from Southeast Asia had virtually ceased. Industrial production declined as raw material imports dried up. The military couldn't move reinforcements to threatened areas because transport ships kept getting sunk. The strategic paralysis extended beyond logistics. Japanese military planning became reactive rather than proactive. Operations were cancelled because ships weren't available to transport troops. Defensive positions were abandoned because they couldn't be supplied. The combined fleet, Japan's most powerful instrument of war, remained largely in port because fuel shortages prevented operations. When the fleet did sortie, as during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, it operated with partially filled fuel tanks because tankers kept getting sunk by submarines. The fleet fought and lost the largest naval battle in history, then limped back to port with just enough fuel remaining to reach harbour. American submarines weren't the only factor in Japan's defeat. Strategic bombing devastated Japanese cities. Island-hopping campaigns seized key bases. Naval battles destroyed the combined fleet's carrier forces. But the submarine campaign against merchant shipping was uniquely effective at strangling Japan's war economy. And radar made that campaign possible. Without radar, American submarines would still have sunk Japanese ships. But the kill rates would have been lower, the risks higher, the strategic impact diminished. Radar transformed submarine warfare from a tactical nuisance to a strategic weapon. The technological lesson extends beyond World War II. Modern submarine warfare still depends on sensors that allow submarines to detect targets before being detected themselves. Today's submarines use sonar arrays that can track ships from hundreds of miles away. They use electronic surveillance equipment that intercepts radar and radio emissions. They use satellite communications to receive targeting data from other platforms. The principle remains identical to what O'Kane practiced in 1944. Information dominance enables tactical dominance. The submarine that knows where the enemy is, while remaining undetected itself, controls the engagement. The Japanese experience illustrates the cost of technological inferiority in modern war. Japan's submariners were brave, skilled, and aggressive. Their escort commanders were experienced and determined. Their merchant mariners kept sailing even as losses mounted catastrophically. But bravery and determination couldn't overcome a 17-mile detection range gap. Technology multiplied American effectiveness while negating Japanese counter-tactics. The Japanese fought with handicaps they never fully understood. Even when they deployed radar to escorts in late 1944, they couldn't close the gap because American technology had continued advancing. The Americans had moved on to improved SJ-1 systems with even better range and reliability. The human dimension of this technological gap deserves emphasis. When Tang detected that convoy on October 24, 1944, the men aboard those Japanese ships were going about normal shipboard routines. Lookouts scanned the horizon. Engineers tended engines. Cooks prepared meals. Soldiers slept in cramped troop compartments. Nobody knew a submarine was watching them from 20 miles away. Nobody knew torpedoes were already being prepared. Nobody knew they had perhaps 90 minutes to live. This was the reality of radar-directed submarine warfare. Death arrived without warning, delivered by an enemy you never saw. The destroyer escort crews tried desperately to protect their charges. They ran search patterns. They listened on hydrophones. They watched for periscope wakes. After attacks, they dropped hundreds of depth charges, hoping to catch the submarine. But they were hunting ghosts. Away, tracking them on radar, sometimes positioning for another attack. The escort's weapons were effective if they could find the target. Their tactics were sound if they knew where to look. But they didn't know. They couldn't know. Their technology didn't permit knowledge. This asymmetry characterized the entire Pacific submarine campaign. American submarines operated with near impunity in waters Japan considered its own. They surfaced off major ports, tracking ships entering and leaving. They positioned along convoy routes, waiting for targets to appear on radar. They operated in groups, coordinating attacks on the same convoy. The Japanese response became increasingly desperate. They routed ships along circuitous paths, adding days to voyages. They sailed only in daylight, when aircraft could provide cover. They hugged coastlines, hoping shallow water would protect against torpedoes. Nothing worked consistently. American submarines adapted to every Japanese countermeasure. The statistical record is overwhelming. Through 44 months of war, from December 1941 to August 1945, American submarines sank approximately 5.3 million tons of Japanese merchant shipping. That represents roughly two-thirds of Japan's pre-war merchant fleet. Another 1.5 million tons was damaged so severely the ships were removed from service. The submarine force, never exceeding 250 boats on patrol at any given time, accomplished this with the loss of 48 submarines. The exchange ratio exceeds 100 to 1. For every American submarine lost, the Japanese lost over 100 ships. This is the most lopsided maritime campaign in modern warfare. Japanese anti-submarine forces did improve as the war progressed. By 1945, some escort commanders had learned to use radar effectively. Some aircraft units had developed proper search patterns using their primitive airborne radar. Some convoy commanders had adopted tactics that reduced submarine effectiveness, but these improvements came too late and were too limited in scope. The damage was already done. Japan's merchant marine was destroyed. The economy was collapsing. The military couldn't be supplied. The population was starving. American submarines had accomplished through information dominance what carrier strikes and battleship bombardments could not. They'd severed Japan's connection to its empire. The radar that made this possible was technologically impressive, but not revolutionary. 10-centimeter wavelength systems were known technology by 1941. Multiple nations had developed similar equipment. The British had meter-wave radar operational before the war started. The Germans had radar-equipped night fighters. The Americans' achievement wasn't inventing radar. It was miniaturizing it for submarine use, producing it in quantity, developing doctrine for its employment, and training operators to use it effectively. This combination of technology, production, doctrine, and training created an asymmetric advantage the Japanese could never overcome. The final irony is that Japan had the scientific knowledge to develop equivalent systems. Japanese physicists understood electromagnetic wave propagation. Japanese engineers could build radio transmitters and receivers. The cavity magnetron, critical component for centimeter wave radar, was actually invented in Japan in 1937, before Britain developed its version. But institutional failures prevented Japan from exploiting its own inventions. The military assigned radar low priority. Industry lacked resources for electronics production. Inter-service rivalry prevented coordination. Training systems couldn't produce enough skilled operators. By the time Japan recognized radar's importance, the gap was too large to close. Commander Richard O'Kane survived Tang's sinking and spent the rest of the war in Japanese prisoner camps. Post-war, he received the Medal of Honor for Tang's 5th Patrol. He'd sunk more enemy ships than any other American submarine commander. 24 confirmed, 31 claimed. Tang had conducted 5 patrols and sunk approximately 230,000 tons of enemy shipping. These numbers made Tang the most successful American submarine of the war. O'Kane's aggressive tactics, enabled by radar-directed attacks, had proven devastatingly effective. But O'Kane would be the first to say that Tang's success reflected systematic advantages rather than individual heroism. Every American submarine in the Pacific had the same radar systems. Every submarine force captain received the same tactical training. Every submarine benefited from code-breaking intelligence that revealed convoy routes. O'Kane executed the system brilliantly, but the system itself was the decisive factor. Japan never developed an equivalent system. Their submarines operated without effective surface search radar throughout the war. Their anti-submarine forces never matched American detection capabilities. The technological gap determined the campaign's outcome before the first shot was fired. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.